Hey, welcome to Dirk Island. This is the weekend show where we watch interesting documentaries and talk about them. This week we watched What's My Name? It's a Muhammad Ali documentary on HBO, directed by Antoine Fuqua, who did Training Day. He did Southpaw, a boxing movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, and also produced by LeBron James. Really interesting feature of one of the most significant boxers and athletes probably ever. Muhammad Ali, in my mind, is Rumble in the Jungle and Thrilla in Manila, old videotapes that we actually had like as VHSs growing up. I don't know if you watched them a lot, but I certainly watched those, and that was like my whole exposure, and it's a lot of promotional material, and also just I knew of Muhammad Ali both as the winner of these two huge fights and also the showman at the center of these movies that I was like putting into the VHS like way back when. And so they were actually old movies by that time anyway. But when I've always had this knowledge of him. Obviously our dad has like a photo of him over Sonny Liston that's signed. He's such a character that I grew up with. And then I don't know if you remember this, but the Will Smith movie on Muhammad Ali is also very much in my mind because he does this really, I thought in that movie at least, a really great job bringing the Muhammad Ali like almost sassiness, or I guess that's not probably the word he would go with, but it is a little bit like this funny, plays off people, plays both sides, so much showmanship, but showmanship in the just all these moments that are really well captured in this documentary with the real Muhammad Ali. A lot of that was kind of distilled for that movie that was Ali. So there's a nostalgia factor to watching this 4 hours of movie. Now, something I would say the impression I got, and why maybe a person who still likes Muhammad Ali knows a lot about Muhammad Ali or doesn't, is that it both covers all of the high points. Thrilla in Manila, Rumble in the Jungle, all of the great Muhammad Ali lines. This is about 4 hours long. Almost 2 hours per piece parts, and it covers all that. But it also gives you a lot more of what the title is. What's My Name? Muhammad Ali. The evolution from Cassius Clay, what he won as his original name, to the joining the Nation of Islam, not going into or refusing to be drafted for Vietnam, telling people basically, you better call me Muhammad Ali. People saying, for many times almost trying to taunt him by saying, no, I'm going to call you Cassius Clay. Like, that's your name. You don't get to just choose your name, which is a funny little, a storyline to follow again, considering modern days and the pronoun fights and all this kind of stuff that goes on. But it's really interesting because he almost uses this. It's serious, and it's also Muhammad Ali, who everything with him is a bit of play. It's a bit of play for publicity. He really was one of those original people who was figuring out how he could drive controversy for his benefit and for the benefit of the other person, to drive controversy for the fight. So there's so much of these elements that I feel like actually have echoes in modern society. The driving controversy for publicity, you call me this, no, I'm not going to call you this. And then just so much more that I think is really fun to watch. And if you don't know your history of culture in the United States, he is so important for the history of culture in the United States, and just a fascinating character. And if you are like me and you like his story and you just like him, whether or not everything he did in his life you agree with, it's a very pleasurable watch in that way. And then I learned things too. Yeah, I liked it a lot. It felt like a very worthy watch because he's a transcendent figure. I love that his nickname's the Greatest, because he's the greatest boxer, but he's also kind of transcends to the greatest athlete in a lot of ways, and he's so amazing in ways outside of the ring. I also had the same exposure. I'd seen Thrilla in Manila and Rumble in the Jungle, and I'd known him from those big wins and mostly his shit talking. Knew a little bit about the politics, but he's a really passionate, fiery person. He has super biting commentary on the United States, which is completely fair, particularly at the time that he made it. So it just felt like
you should watch this. He's one of, and that's what I love, that it's an HBO sports documentary, because I think we've talked about this. I'm not that big of a sports fan, but HBO does such a great job of extracting story out of sport that feels bigger than sport. And Muhammad Ali is definitely one of those people. And it was also, there was a sadness to this that I'd seen a little bit more, but he's such a witty, smart person. I mean, his mind is as quick as his feet, and his hands. It really is. There's like a parallel between how he is as a fighter. He's not the hardest puncher, but he's quick, and just like his wit is quick. And he's such a likable person, and he's clearly intelligent in ways about politics, and has a big heart, and is like a socially driven person too. And then you kind of see him, the part that I hadn't seen seen his losses before Thrilla in Manila and I'm forgetting Rumble in the Jungle. So I hadn't seen those losses, and they kind of show this slog, like after he's the greatest, he just keeps fighting, and he has this rope-a-dope kind of strategy, which is almost a metaphor for his career, where he's just like on the ropes, taking so many more punches in individual fights and also in his career than you want him to. And I mean, I could about burst into tears when you see him light the Olympic torch in Atlanta, Georgia in 1996. And so there's a couple more, it's just like a more fuller picture of Muhammad Ali than I had gotten, and a lot more on kind of what you were talking about, that the politics of his name change. But feels like it's one of those kind of hearty documentaries where I feel like it's about someone who's so important that you're not going to waste your time by learning more about this person.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you're, you didn't live contemporaneously with him in your life. And some of it's, pulling from history, kind of recent history, but pulling from history to become more culturally aware and literate, and because it is relevant to modern, his echoes are relevant to modern society. He's just such a forerunner in so many categories, and so likable. Really, really enjoyable to watch, and sad too. The sadness is one of the main reasons why this movie hits with you. I think this one is such a large project, such a large figure, that there are multiple reasons why someone would watch this. Which kind of a question we try to focus on is usually like, why does this documentary matter? Why should anyone go see it? The sadness that, especially towards the end of the career, is really interesting to watch in this context. And the sadness we're talking about is, it's no surprise unless you don't know anything about Muhammad Ali. He obviously was this crazy great boxer who slowed down a lot in his career, and then he developed Parkinson's over time and he died. It was just really tragic because he was so loved that you see someone kind of deteriorating, and because he's a boxer too, and because you saw him take so many hits to the head and to the body, it also feels like you witnessed the deterioration or the things that preceded the deterioration, which is very sad. So it's doubly tough with a person like him, and I think that is the testament to HBO Sports that you're talking about. A documentary can distill for you both the cultural significance, the story of triumph, the story of loss, all of these things that really can communicate to you things that are so important about being a human on Earth. I mean, regular business, regular things people do to create widgets in the economy is important, but the things that people do for art and sport is oftentimes where the greatest stories lie, and where people are most engaged in their entire life too. So I just find, the thing about watching him with the torch at the Olympics, I'm crying at that moment. And for him, I think that the feeling of loss for him is really apparent because of how much you had. You only realize how much you're losing because of how much you had. His star was so bright that you feel like it's so hard for it to even be diminished for a while and then not around anymore. It's really difficult to deal with. And I think you see that with like a Tiger Woods too. I mean, his star was so bright for so many years that when he went away for 10 years, that was so difficult for so many people, even though he had so many problems with his marriage, and there were a lot of things. He had body problems. He was getting all these surgeries. I mean, it's a bit tragic. And then to see the redemption is another sports. It's so weird, but in sports, something about it, it just connects with people. It draws them in, especially the long stories like that. And Muhammad Ali is another one. It plays out completely different, but it's so engaging because of the something about the loss of the brightness of a Muhammad Ali, and also the ability for sports to transcend all of the other types of differences we have. There's a great montage of him with all these questionable characters, especially like Fidel Castro, being like, put it here, Muhammad Ali traveling to Cuba, meeting Fidel Castro, and Castro's just like, hey, he's like, wants to get a shot of Muhammad Ali, like going like this to him. And you're just like, a lot of things melt away on that whole sports thing. I think there's a really interesting point that Muhammad Ali makes very early on in the documentary. Some guy's asking basically, aren't you guys just like aren't you worried about what you're doing to each other's brains?
Have you ever considered you've taken lots of blows to the head, both of you, throughout your career, with the possibility of, say, permanent brain damage?
And I know you're not concerned about two black fathers' brains being hurt that much now. I know you're not that wrapped up over our brains. You really worried about my brains? Anybody else's brains? We not worried about it, so why are we not worried about it?
And Muhammad Ali's like, stop.
But what kind of sport is it? Where a guy goes in a ring and gets his jaw broken.
Watch your handling. What kind of sport is this? When a guy gets in a damn car in your country and go around a damn track and hit a pole and he burn up.
It's a great moment because people do care about this stuff, like CTE and people in the NFL. People care a lot about this, but the problem is that it seems like Muhammad Ali, he did suffer for what he put himself through, but this is the life that it seems like he really wanted to live, and he excelled so hard at it.
Don't get on our little sport. We don't have nothing over no way but a job, and few of us can't get nothing unless we can box. And now you want to run that out.
Yeah, and there's huge themes, but just kind of on a different tune, something I really liked were just the minor details. And you talk about him being a performer. There's this training camp that he made, basically a log cabin compound that I had never heard of, that I guess is now opening to the public. And it was funny because he was training for the Joe Frazier fight, and they bring a news crew out, and he's like chilling with an axe in the woods. And they're like, so tell us about your training regimen. And he's like, well, why country folk are always, sharper witted than the city folk. It's because you're out here drinking clean water. My vegetables aren't frozen. They're from down the street. He's like, I'm, breathing the fresh air. And he's literally like holding an axe and going and like, he's like, oh, I gotta go. And he goes like to chop another tree down.
I'm the real champion, and I'm going to prove it. And I'll see you now. I got to go chop down some more trees.
Okay.
Out here somewhere. More trees back over here somewhere.
I'm just like, this is so counter to what I think of the normal champion story, which is like, show him in the ring, like training, pushing past his pain. He has like that famous quote, which is like, I thought training was hell, but I'd rather suffer that now and be the greatest for all time, or something along those lines. Some like, true work ethic kind of thing. But it's funny to see, one of the greatest all time kind of chilling in this retreat area. And the focus wasn't on just what a gritty, hard worker he was. And he must have been, to win. But I kind of like this weird laid back thing where I'm like, is this fully an act? Like, how much of this is true? How much of it is not? Just like funny details. And also his stature, like he is not, especially compared to a lot of major athletes today, he's kind of like regularly sized. He's a fit guy, clearly, but there's just some interesting details that watching this whole thing, I was like, that does not match with my like headspace for what the greatest, the intensity and the kind of militant mindset that the greatest of all time would have. And that's what kind of makes him amazing, is that he probably did have all that training, but he wasn't interested in necessarily espousing that at all times. He was a little bit of a performer.
What kind of training are you doing up here?
I'm running up and down mountain in these big boots. I'm chopping down these trees every day, as you see up through here, and I'm ready
What kind of shape are you in? You in good
Looking
shape?
for a few bears. I heard of some bears loose around here somewhere. So I'm gonna catch a few wild bears and whoop them too.
Or, you know, the news crew's out. I'm going to make this entertaining. I'm going to talk some shit, and I'm going to have an axe and cut a tree down in front of you as if that's my whole training regimen, which is like, that clearly cannot be. but yet he's doing that when the camera crew comes, which I just loved so much.
The whole thing is a performance that is on top of itself, and you don't know where fiction and reality exist with him. And he a bit, in a way, seemed to invent that. There's another moment that I made us pause and go back on, which is the whole thing where he's talking about promoting the Rumble in the Jungle, which is this fight that he's going to go fight George Foreman in the Congo and in Africa. And so this is a big deal. They're bringing this huge event, what was called the biggest sports event in history at the time, to Africa. And one announcer goes, "So are you glad to go get George Foreman on your home turf?"
I'm gonna whoop George Foreman, and I'm gonna whoop him of all places in Africa, in the Congo, where the Lumumba boys are.
Well, fighting in your home territory, you couldn't be any happier the way this is coming up in September.
Why would you call Africa my home territory?
You've been telling me that for 10 years.
That's right, and if you come over there talking like that, we'll cook you.
That's it for Muhammad Ali.
It's like, it's just like the play that he was engaged with at the time was so insane. He's teasing and ribbing everybody on all levels. He plays on race. He plays on tropes. He plays on things that would not be even PC today. There's a moment where he's talked about getting punch drunk, and someone says, like, "You're going to be on Queer Street," and he goes into this whole thing about, "What do you mean?" And he does a huge impression that would be like a real problem on TV today, but different times. And also, like, it's just you see a guy who was helping us invent, like, cultural play in a way. And that's also a little bit sad that it's not exactly the same, because he was so fun. He's so fun. He was challenging people in a real way on race. I mean, he did join the Nation of Islam. He did go to trial for not going into Vietnam, for saying he had an objection to the war, a religious objection to the war. And the Nation of Islam was a controversial organization. I mean, there were scenes with him with Malcolm X, and then Malcolm X is murdered, not that long later. And there was a lot of conflict in society at the time, and they try to kind of throw you into that context, but without even knowing much more about that, it's even hard to process what world he's operating in at the time. So he is really important, and yet his importance is also he plays, and it's just a really fun and unique individual to witness throughout history. And it's almost like you just wish for more, but you're only going to get a few, and it's just like a great thing that we had Muhammad Ali. And it's great to, even though that we don't really overlap with him, but he's just such a great figure. I feel like that's what a lot of documentaries do for you, is they can be a little bit of a time capsule. There's another one that we watched recently we'll talk about, but it's the Dr. Ruth documentary, which I feel has that same thing, especially the character-driven documentaries. They can take you and let you connect with someone that was not a part of your life, but you get to experience that magic that they laid into the world through the documentary, which is just one of the greatest reasons why this genre is so incredible. Welcome back to Dirk Island. This segment is worth watching, where we review the new HBO documentary, What's My Name?, about Muhammad Ali by Antoine Fuqua. We have a consensus on this one. We both really loved it, and it is an 8. Yes, worth watching. So this scale is really 8. It's an out of 10 scale, and 9 and 10 are kind of reserved for documentaries that maybe are like the best in the top 100, or even if you don't like documentaries, you go and wait to watch this. I think this documentary actually does, for me, almost press into a 9 category, which is that if you don't know much about Muhammad Ali, maybe then I would recommend this even higher than an 8, which is that he is so important as a cultural character, and this documentary covers his life so well. He has so much impact on our current culture, on even the premise of this documentary being, what's my name, Muhammad Ali? It's basically the first half almost is about his transition from being Cassius Clay to joining the Nation of Islam, changing his name, and then kind of going around being like, you're going to call me Muhammad Ali. That's what I want to be called. Like, you should call me by what I ask for. And that was a bit controversial at the time. And then also with the not wanting to go to Vietnam, potentially going to trial over it, trying to get a religious exemption, being stripped of his heavyweight boxing championship title over it. All of these elements that today, when we see the cultural wars over who wants to be called what pronoun or all these other things, they have echoes and of a time where people do just want to be, where it's viewed in a different lens. It can make you possibly look at some of these things a little bit differently, or, it's not the exact same scenario, but there's so much that he echoes. Also, the controversy for publicity. He was such an inventor of controversy for publicity, for every fight, and he had legitimate problems with people that he still used for the promotion of sport, and he was so funny and so likable, and he would say he's so bad too. There's this poem that he reads. Some of the documentary covers so many of his great poems, like the one he did before the Rumble in the Jungle. He's like, I killed a rock. I'm so bad I make medicine sick. It's just like
I drown water.
Yeah, it's like, and it's said much better than that. But this documentary covers all of these Muhammad Ali greats, these things that maybe you've never been exposed to, which, if that's the case, I would say even higher. You should go out and you should find this on HBO and you should watch this. But if you watch a ton of documentaries like us, I would just say this is a top tier documentary, which is an 8, and that's why I would say it is worth watching.
Yeah, an 8 worth watching for me as well. The documentary is really well made, but mostly because of who Muhammad Ali was. His nickname's the greatest, which is so perfect. He's a transcendent character. He's like the greatest boxer, arguably the greatest athlete of his era, and one of the kind of the greatest people, period, of his era. At least that's how I felt. And his life and what he achieved, he's such an amazing athlete, but he's also such an amazing performer and a wit, and his intellect went beyond the bounds of just the boxing ring to talk about politics and race in America. And his life, intersected with Vietnam, Nixon, Watergate, a lot of really relevant times in history. And so for that reason, it's like this amazing person who walks you through this really interesting and an important time in history. So you're just not going to waste your time learning more about Muhammad Ali, because to me, he just feels like a person to be treasured. He's just a transcendent figure. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, so if you like documentaries, definitely go out and check this out. What's My Name, Muhammad Ali on HBO. And thanks very much for watching. If you'd like to keep up with us, please subscribe on YouTube, or you can also get this available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts. Thanks very much.
Thank you.